If you want to learn how to become a better and more effective writer in academia, stay with me. Hi, and welcome to the Uncon School at howtobecomeaprofessor.com, the web show to learn from proven professors and experts. Effective academic writing was, still is, and will be the backbone of the academic world. However, academic writing in English in a clear and concise manner is nothing that comes easily. Not for natives and especially not for non-English speakers. If you want to learn a skill that you can apply in all areas in life, welcome to the show. For this interview, I've invited Dr. Kristin Sainani. Kristin is a clinical assistant professor at Stanford University and also a health and science writer. After receiving a Master in Science and Statistics and a PhD in epidemiology from Stanford University, she studied science writing at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She has taught statistics and writing at Stanford for a decade and has received several Excellence in Teaching awards from the graduate program in epidemiology. Dr. Sainani writes about science for a range of audiences. Her stories appear in Stanford Magazine, Stanford Medicine Magazine, and Biomedical Computation Review. She authors the health column Body News for Allure magazine as well. She's also the statistical editor for the journal Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, and she authors a statistics column, Statistically Speaking, for this journal. Kristin, thank you very much for taking your time. I know that you're super busy, so it's a big honor to pick your brain today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Stefan.
All right, so it's kind of rare to see that you are you're a certified and qualified expert in science writing. And I didn't know even before that there is a major in science writing as well. So the very first question, which seems to be obvious for academics, but still it's really important to figure this out. Why is good writing in academia so important?
Sure. So absolutely, good writing is important. Well, I think for anything you want to do in life, but certainly for academia. And probably for two major reasons. So one is a purely, selfish reason is if you want to be an academic professor to succeed, you really have to be able to master writing. Because think about everything you have to do to be a professor. If you're in the sciences, which is where I sit, you have to write grants to get funded. You have to publish papers. If you're in the humanities, you're publishing papers and books. So pretty much a lot of your day is spent writing, and it's fundamental to success in academia.
Right.
So that's one reason. I think there's a broader sort of societal reason for good writing being important in academia, which is just that if you're spending the time doing all this great research, but your ideas kind of get locked in a little silo because your writing is so obscure that nobody can read it or understand it, then your ideas won't get out there. And if you want to move science forward or whatever academic discipline you're in, good writing really fundamentally accelerates progress, because when you can get your ideas out there and lots of people understand them, then other people can build on your work.
Okay, awesome. I'm personally struggling. I'm not an English native. I'm also struggling with effective and clear and concise language, academic language. So I'm really interested, and I'm sure that our audience as well. Is there a blueprint for academic writing?
Sure. So I spend a lot of time teaching academics, especially scientists and doctors, how to write better. And one of the first things I tell them is sort of that they need to unlearn all the bad habits that they've picked up by being in academia for too long. So unfortunately, when you're in academia, I think you get exposed to a lot of papers, a lot of things that are full of jargon, that are full of complex sentence structure, big paragraphs, big words. And these are all the kinds of things that you actually don't want to do.
Okay.
So in a way, the blueprint for effective academic writing is to try to avoid some of the things that you may think are necessary to be part of the academic club. I've got to use all these big words. I've got to use these complicated sentences. And in fact, that's really not what you should do. You should be striving, as you said, to be as concise and clear as possible. But I think when a lot of academics sit down to write, that's not at the forefront of their brain, is that, I got to get my idea across as clearly and concisely and efficiently as possible. Oftentimes I think that gets a little bit lost. And unfortunately, then the writing is hard to follow as much academic writing. So the more that you can read things that are not academic journals, go out and read the New Yorker, the New York Times, kind of sources of writing where people are really paying attention to good prose, that I think can help a lot. Academics should, in a way, mimic that a little bit better.
Okay, I see. And, are there differences in style between writing in the sciences and writing in the humanities? I heard this rumor or this myth that it's far more important to be a good writer in the humanities than in the sciences, because all that matters in the sciences are the facts and the numbers. What is your take on that?
So first of all, I spend a lot of time advocating for good writing in the sciences. So I would disagree with that premise in the sense of, I think personally that writing is just as important in science. As I said, to move scientific progress forward, good writing is absolutely fundamental. There may be a feeling out there that a lot more of what you do in the humanities is about the writing itself and the language itself. But I actually think that there are fewer differences between writing in the sciences and the humanities than you might think. I think the fundamental principles of effective writing apply across all disciplines. So using good verbs and concise language, cutting out all the clutter and the jargon, using simpler sentence structure, all of those good principles of effective writing are uniform across the different disciplines. Now, the goals of science, writing in the sciences and the writing in the humanities might be slightly different, and probably people in the humanities, in the sciences, you're really just trying to get your ideas across clearly and efficiently. In the humanities, you might sort of wax poetic a bit, right?
Right.
But I think really, though, that if I were teaching a class in writing in the humanities, I'd be using most of the same principles that I'd be teaching scientists, I think.
Okay, got it. Could you share with our audience, fundamental writing principles that you were teaching?
Sure. So a couple of my favorites. So the first one that I like to teach is get rid of the clutter. So I always put up a few slides at the beginning of any lecture I'm giving where I have these kind of very long sentences or long paragraphs. And I systematically go through and say, okay, see how many words we can cut. And it's always surprising to people, it's just how many words you can actually cut that are completely unnecessary, that actually add absolutely nothing to the sentence. So, and it's not a hard thing to do once you kind of pay attention. So I do a lot of, teaching people to cut clutter. So that's probably my first thing. The first lesson that I give people is how to cut all of that unnecessary clutter. I also spend a lot of time talking about cutting unnecessary jargon, and you feel like, well, I'm in this technical field, I have to use all the technical words, especially students, right? Because you want to feel like you're part of the club, you got to throw in all the big words, and I really discourage people from using jargon just for jargon's sake. And
right.
I have one example I like to throw around that somebody was saying muscular and cardiorespiratory performance, and I said, well, that's fitness, right? So we can just say fitness, and we don't need to use this long big term in that context. So I spend a lot of time on that. And then I spend a lot of time talking about verbs. And so the English language really works on verbs. And so unfortunately, a lot of academic writing ends up being written with nouns. That is, people use a lot of nouns instead of verbs. And they also tend to write in the passive voice.
Right.
Right. So the active voice is subject, verb, object. And I spend a lot of time trying to get people to write in that active voice, subject, verb, object, keeping the subject and the verb close together at the beginning of the sentence. And just using really good active verbs can make your writing a lot more lively. So that's what I spend a lot of time. Those are probably the major principles that I spend a lot of time talking about.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for being so specific and actionable. Well, let's move on to the next question. Are there differences? What is the difference between writing for a newspaper, for instance, and writing for a journal? I know, obvious question, but still it would be nice if you could break down those differences.
Sure, and I do a little bit of both types of writing. So I do write for magazines, and I write, sometimes for journals. So I actually spend a lot of time in my classes on writing. I will spend some time teaching my scientists, my doctors, how to write like a newspaper writer. So I actually think there's a lot that academics can learn from newspaper reporters or journalists. And that's because what a newspaper writer is really good at is sort of boiling down all of the information into readable, easy to read, quick, efficient, short, getting to the facts quickly, and having a clear take-home message. Mm-hmm. So newspaper writers are very good at that. Academic writers tend to not be as great at that. So they tend to get bogged down by a lot of details, and oftentimes you could read a whole journal article and you have no idea what the take-home message is. And that's a problem, because if you read a whole article and you really don't know what the essence of it is, yeah. And obviously the authors have not done a good job getting their message across. Excuse me. So I think there's a lot that journalists have to teach scientists in terms of getting a clear take-home message, just getting to the bare-bone facts without all of this unnecessary jargon and clutter and everything. Newspaper writers tend to have a bigger premium on space than a scientific article, and that sort of forces you to have to really boil it down to what are the key ideas that I want to convey. Right. Now, of course, there are certainly differences. If you were writing for an academic article, an academic journal, a scientific article, you're going to go into all of the details to prove, your watertight scientific proof that you've measured things correctly and that you've done your controls. And obviously, if somebody was writing a newspaper article about your research, they're not going to delve into that level of detail. So the layers of detail are going to be much deeper in a journal article. But, in a way, the bigger picture, the take-home message, the main ideas ought to be clear in both.
Right, okay, got it. Let's dive deeper into the different categories of academic texts. The first one are journal articles, second reviews, the third one are commentaries. Could you explain a little bit what those text categories are all about, and how can young academics prepare themselves better in order to become better and more proficient in writing those kind of texts?
Sure. Again, I think all the different types of text, you still have the underlying principles of effective writing apply across. So all of that will be the same. A journal article, like an original research article, of course, I teach in the sciences, so we tend to have our typical introduction, results, tables and figures, discussion. It follows kind of a very strict format. Right. And you have to learn that format. And so one of the things that happens in graduate school, I think, is you're sort of expected to learn that format just from reading a lot of papers. But in fact, it's much easier if you have somebody who says, hey, in my area, in my world, an introduction section, for example, is supposed to be about 3 paragraphs long. Mm-hmm. And if nobody tells you that, you end up writing introduction sections. Everybody feels, as a student, like I've got to write this long literature review and so you end up writing way, way too much. And if somebody were to just give you these little pointers about what's the expected format, that can be very, very helpful. So look for guidance wherever you can find it, from an advisor or a course in writing that can give you those little tips so that you know that there is a very set format for that type of article usually. Okay. The other thing for original research articles, again, coming from the science areas, I spend a lot of time talking about making good tables and figures, so your data presentation being really important. And you don't think of that as part of writing, but in fact, a lot of times in original science research manuscript centers around that data and those tables and figures. And so I often advise students to pay more attention to those and putting those together. They tell a story, and it's usually pretty easy to write your story around them if you've laid them out nicely. So those are the main tips for an original research article. Reviews and commentaries are great in the sense of, if you're a student, a review article is a great way to dive into your field. It's a great way to get published. It forces you to really get up to speed on the current literature. You're basically giving an overview of the latest research on a particular question. Mm-hmm. So I think they're great to do for students. They're great practice for writing. The nice thing about something that's like a review or a commentary is that you get a little bit more freedom in your writing. So again, the original research manuscript is pretty strict in the format, and you don't get to, sort of wax poetic at all. In a review article, or especially a commentary, or these other types of articles that you'll see in journals, you can often have a little bit more freedom with your language. Like I write a statistics column, I'll throw in a joke every now and then. You can be a little philosophical. So they're kind of fun to write because you get a little bit more freedom in terms of just, in your writing. Then also, of course, a review and a commentary, you don't have to actually go out and collect any of your own original research data. So for a student, those are often a good way to get a paper out and good practice without having to do a whole, experiment.
Okay, got it. I'd like to ask you two more very important questions. The first one is, how can non-English natives like me become more effective writers? I mean, I think many foreign academics, they have a really solid foundation of the English language, but when it comes to level it up, right, especially become an effective academic writer, what can they do?
Sure. I have a lot of students who are non-native English speakers, and I know it's really difficult. I mean, I can't imagine having to write in a language that is not my own native language. So it's just my hat's off to my students who really do it well, because it's a really tough thing. And I think the main thing is you have to understand that it's going to take some time, exposure, patience, and there's no way to pick up the idiosyncrasies of a language without just a lot of exposure. And so, my one advice, I think, would be to not expect to be able to overnight become a great, writer in English. It's just going to take a lot of time. And I recommend to my students that they do as much reading as they can in the English language to learn all those idiosyncrasies. And again, not necessarily reading academic articles or journal articles where you may pick up bad habits in English, but reading good sources of, good English prose. And I, point people to just popular media, the New York Times, the New Yorker, Newsweek, some of these kinds of popular Scientific American, Discover magazine. These are good sources where you can pick up just by getting exposed some of the principles of good English writing and some of the nuances of it. So I think, practice, if you have to publish for your promotion, and, sometimes if you're not a native English speaker, finding a copy editor or somebody, even a lab mate or something who is willing to edit your work, somebody that can actually edit your work can be very, very helpful in you learning the nuances of the English language and helping to make sure that when you send something to a journal, it doesn't sound awkward in the phrasing.
Okay, awesome. The final question I'd like to ask you is regarding organization of the writing process and establishing a writing routine that works. I've asked that question a lot, also other professors, and the answers are pretty different. Many professors tend to say they need to write every day, even if it's just one sentence or one small paragraph. Others say that they need big long chunks of time in order to get writing done, because they need to get into the writing zone. Is there a general advice on how to establish a writing routine and overcome that writer's block?
So this is something I love to talk about, and I talk a lot about in my classes, is the writing process itself. And I think a lot of students, scientists, academics struggle with writing. They dread it. Especially scientists, is where I'm coming from. They just, they procrastinate, and it's this huge, huge struggle. And I believe a lot of that has to do with people just having a poor writing process. And sometimes, students just haven't figured out what works for them. And so I advise to students, as early as you can, figure out a writing process that works for you. And it might look a little bit different for everybody. And I can say sort of what works for me and what things I've figured out over the years are probably bad habits, especially for me, but probably generally in the writing process. But, everybody will be slightly different in what they find works for them. And so you actually want to put some time and thought and energy, and you want to invest that early in your career and figure out what is your most efficient writing process, because that will save you time, energy, heartache down the road. Excuse me. If you figure that out early in your career rather than later in your career. Sorry. So, I'll just throw out some tips that I generally give. The things that I think people do wrong that make their writing process unnecessarily hard. Mm-hmm. And so one of the main things, so I have heard, a lot of people say you got to write every day. And I think writing every day is great, because anything that's practicing writing is wonderful. But what I discourage students from doing is, let's say you get your data in and say, okay, I've got data, great. Now tomorrow I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write my whole paper. So this is what happens. People say, okay, I got my data, now I got to write my paper, and I'm going to strap myself to my computer chair, right? Put the big cup of coffee, and I am going to barrel through this introduction section. And people have these big goals and sit down to write before they're really ready to write. And so you sit down to write your introduction section, and you haven't worked out what are the ideas that are going in there? What are the literature pieces that, what am I going to be referencing? And so the writing process ends up looking something like this. I open up my blank Word document. I start to write my first sentence. Oh, wait a minute. There's a study I need to reference here. Let me jump over to Google or PubMed, find that study, get the piece of information I need, scroll through the PDF, find it. Let me pop back now to my Word document 20 minutes later. And by the way, while I'm over in PubMed, I might as well check my Facebook page and my email, right? And so 20 minutes later, they haven't done absolutely any writing. What you've actually been doing there is gathering information. Mm-hmm. And so I like to tell people to separate those two steps. Gathering information is different than writing, and if you try to do them together, it's a really, really painful way to write, because you're not actually writing, and you'll feel like it's very slow, but you're really not doing any writing. That's the whole point. So what I tell people to do is to do what I call a pre-writing step. So go through, collect all that information that you know that you're going to need from the literature, sort of extract it. When I'm writing something, we'll put together a single Word document that has, I know I need this piece of information from this reference, and I'll have those facts and figures and ideas at my fingertips. I'll organize them in some kind of roadmap or outline before I sit down to write any sentences. And that just means that when I sit down to write, I am writing quickly. I am not writing, I can write a page in 20 minutes because everything's right there, and I'm actually writing. I'm not fact checking, searching for information and checking my email and procrastinating. So investing that time in that pre-writing step, figuring out your ideas and your organization, and a lot of that before you actually sit down to write any prose really will help also downstream, because what comes out will be much more organized and thought out, and it won't be this kind of jumble. So that's one thing that I advise students. The other thing that I advise students is to rely a lot on revision. So a lot of scientists, a lot of academics are perfectionists. We tend to say, okay, I don't want to go on to the next sentence until I got the last sentence perfect. And people will hem and haw over a single sentence, rewrite it, try to get it perfect, and they won't move on to the next sentence. I've had a lot of students tell me this until they've gotten that last sentence perfect. And that's just I think, a very inefficient way to write. So when I'm writing a first draft, I just try to bang it out as quickly as I can. My only criteria is complete sentences. So it doesn't have to sound good. Yeah. I don't care if it's the prose is awkward, as long as it's a complete sentence and I've got my ideas down in order on my page, I'm happy. Because once I've got something written down on the computer and, it's in complete sentences, you feel kind of a relief, like you've got it down, you know what ideas are going where. And then making the prose pretty is something which people think takes a lot of upfront effort, but that's something that actually happens later. So I can go back to my own writing once it's down. Making it sound good, the prose at the sentence level is actually really, really easy compared to reorganizing the whole piece. And so I will spend a very small fraction of my time writing a paper on writing the first draft. I usually tell students it's about 10% of my whole writing time would actually be spent on the first draft. A huge amount of time is spent on pre-writing, a huge amount of time is spent on revision. I just like to bang out the first draft efficiently, get it, because that's the hardest part of writing, is just getting something down on the paper. Get that down quickly, don't hem and haw over it. And the other, sorry, the other tip that I have for students in terms of, figuring out what works for you, is to find ways to write away from the computer. Because sitting at the computer is torturous for most of us if you're sitting and looking at a blank screen that you have to fill in with prose. And I'm also very busy. I have young children, hence you can see their artwork and behind me here. So I do a lot of writing on my commute. I do a lot of writing when I'm out running. And so literally, if I'm working on a big article, I take my iPod, which I usually would listen to while I'm running. I put it in a drawer somewhere and say, okay, this week I am working on my story while I'm running. And I am literally kind of thinking out the take-home messages, the ideas. I'll write, I'll take out my tape recorder in my car and I'll actually write things, I'll dictate them into the tape recorder. So it's a lot less painful, and you feel like you're being very efficient because you're using all this extra kind of wasted time in the day to write. And so you kind of feel like, like you're getting a lot of your writing done, and it's not painful to write in the car or while you're running, because, you're not sort of sitting at that blank screen agonizing over your words. So find things like that work for you that are away from the computer. And I think that can be really helpful. I do a lot of writing like that, not at the computer.
Excuse me, can you repeat it? How does the writing process work while you are running with your iPod?
So what am I doing? So basically I'm turning off my iPod first of all, so that I'm not listening to books or NPR, which is what I usually would do when I'm out running. And I'm just sort of piecing through what's the organization. So this is all the pre-writing stuff I was talking about. What's the flow of my piece going to be? What are the main ideas I want to convey? What's going to go where? And sometimes, you'll even, if you're kind of just letting your mind wander on something, a lot will kind of synthesize. You'll solidify what's your take-home message and what am I really trying to say in that paragraph? And so you're not writing prose, I'm usually not writing like a whole, page or anything, but I might write a sentence in my head while I'm out running or something. But I'm just sort of working through the big picture structure of stories, which is usually the part that's the hardest to fix if you don't get it right. So students can come to me with a piece and the prose is a little awkward, but the ideas are organized well and clear. I can fix that in 10 minutes. Student comes to me with a piece that they really don't know what they were trying to say, and it's very unorganized. That piece is going to take hours and days to fix. So it's kind of that getting solid on the structure and the ideas and the flow of the story. It's very, very important, and then you can do a lot of that away from the computer.
All right, Kristin, thank you so much. You really provided so much value and very actionable, I would call them hacks, right? How to become more an effective academic writer in the science and humanities. All right, if people are interested in getting to know you more and your work and your expertise, where can they find you?
Sure. So if you want some more actual actionable lessons on good writing, I have this course up on Coursera. You can still sign up for the course to get the archives, and all the videos and exercises are there. So just to kind of review the basics of good writing, all of that is up there. I also have a lot of information for scientists about how to get published in the sciences, not so much for humanities, sorry. So that's one place I can point you to is to my Coursera course, which is called Writing in the Sciences, and it's still up, even though it's not currently running.
All right, awesome. Dr. Kristin Sainani, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your knowledge with us. If you guys, the audience, are as excited as I am, and if you would like to learn more actionable lessons from unconventional professors and academics, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit us at howtobecomeaprofessor.com.